morning. Is everybody sufficiently caffeinated? So our next panel is really exciting. Every year, Inc. honors 30 founders under the age of 30 who are launching businesses that are changing the world. And today, I am pleased to be joined by Joe Fasone, one of those honorees, the founder and CEO of a non-traditional internet service provider called Pilot. So welcome, Joe. How's it going? So, Joe, tell us a little bit about how you came to start Pilot. And by the way, we were joking before we got on stage. I think this is the first time I've interviewed someone who's younger than me. I'm used to being the young, prolific person. And before this 24-year-old, I'm humbled. So tell us a little bit about how you got here.
No, thank you. So I spent 4 years, but this is back in 2010. I started out as the head of IT for WeWork. And back then, WeWork wasn't a co-working and community empire. It was just one.
Not valued at $20 billion.
No, it wasn't even a tech startup back then. And so it was just one small building in Soho in Manhattan. And I started out kind of as the IT guy. Little did I know it would expand and expand and expand globally to what was, in 2014, dozens of locations and now hundreds. But I was focused on a few things, and one of them was bringing fiber connectivity to all of our locations.
And how old were you at that time?
When I started, I was 16. And then
dropped out of high school, right?
I did. That was not a fun conversation with my parents, but they were very, very supportive, and it ended up being a good call. So.
Excellent. And what is Pilot? Tell us more about the business model, what it is you're trying to do.
So Pilot started as a better internet provider for businesses in New York. We started off in Manhattan, really bringing competitive gigabit fiber service to traditionally underserved buildings, whether those are in Chelsea or Soho, where there was a really dense concentration of businesses that needed bandwidth to succeed.
Right.
And I knew from WeWork that there weren't any agile brands in the space that had loyalty, that had a competitive offering, that could consistently deliver for a growing startup. And I was like, wow, this very unsexy space is prime for a startup to come in and find out how to do it more efficiently and deliver a consistently amazing customer experience for growing businesses. And that's how we started back in 2014, and we service 400 buildings now across New York, Philly, DC, and Boston.
Got it. So to be clear, your clients then are mostly businesses or also residential buildings?
So we service businesses today, and we go all the way from a 5-person, salon all the way up to a 5,000-person bank. So no stone unturned. Gotcha.
And how large is the company now in terms of the number of employees? I know you mentioned that you're across the Eastern Seaboard. How big is the company? How have you evolved?
Yeah, so since 2014, we've grown to about 110 employees now. We're all based in New York. We service 400 office buildings, which is about 100 million square feet of commercial real estate. And we have 35 internet data centers all across the country, which we use to deliver content to our customers.
Interesting. My sense is that you also have a non-traditional approach to financing the company, i.e. you didn't take venture capital very early on. So tell me a little bit about that. When you were first getting started, you're 20 years old. I'm guessing you probably didn't have a lot in savings at the time. You're pitching venture capitalists who are probably mostly at least 20 years your seniors. What was that process like? How did you finance the company?
Yeah, it was interesting. I think the biggest privilege I had going into the financing process was that it's a B2B business where we charge a very fair price for our service, and we were collecting those revenues on day one. So being able to, deploy my savings at the time into the business, but immediately get recurring revenue back from our customers, gave us a really strong position, allowed us to hire our first, half dozen employees, and it told a much more compelling story than, we hope to deploy this product and get thousands of users. We're already generating cash flow, right? So you're investing in a business that can produce cash.
It's kind of a rare story in Silicon Valley these days.
Yeah, exactly. But when you're raising capital, especially in an industry for a business that is very I call it unsexy, but it's historically not been financed by venture capital.
Right.
It was really important to us, right? Because we had to kind of sift through these very software-friendly investors who are very used to hearing, so all you need is developers, right? We're like, well, no, we need cable and trucks and all this other stuff.
Yeah.
And that's not part of the pitch they're used to hearing.
That's interesting. So when did you take your first round of financing?
So we went into Techstars, the Techstars New York Accelerator, which I highly recommend for anyone thinking about starting a business in New York. Shameless plug. We went into that accelerator in late 2014. It finished up in March of 15, and that's when we closed our seed round, which was led by RRE Ventures and Union Square Ventures.
Awesome. Tell me a little bit more about what it's like to be a young entrepreneur running a business with more than 100 employees. I mean, what has your experience been like? It strikes me that you must have hit the ground running, right? I mean, you had never managed people. You'd never even really, worked anywhere besides WeWork, and even then you were 16 years old and kind of, charting your own path. What have you had to learn along the way? What are some of the challenges that have been unique to being a young manager?
Yeah, I think, especially in the CEO seat, I often describe it as going from founder to CEO. They're two very different jobs.
Sure, yeah.
And I'm a solo founder, which is also kind of unique in the fact that I'm an engineer at heart. Makes it really difficult to delegate effectively in the early days, where you care so much about every facet of the business. Not that I don't care about them today by any means, but because I was an engineer very early on, I had my eye on engineering a lot more than I should have, when really, the business and our people should have been my prime focus. And so the hardest thing to learn to do when not only you're playing multiple roles, but this is your baby, is to ultimately delegate and let the people you've hired and entrust to do what they need to do to make the business successful.
That's interesting. So it sounds like maybe you made a couple of mistakes in the early days in terms of sort of learning how to grow the company as a leader and not necessarily as an engineer.
Yeah, I mean, for me, there's a couple of learnings that I think really stand out to me. It's, recognize that people are your everything, and so build out really great people functions. And by those, I mean traditional HR and recruiting and kind of employee experience. Build those out early on, because in order to be great, and when I say great, I mean a workplace where people can thrive and go from A to B in their career and be successful and happy in the process. You can't be doing that on your own. That is more than a full-time job, and you can't be doing it while trying to recruit great talent for your business. So that I think was the best example of, this immediate sigh of relief where we brought in amazing people to take that part of the business and run with it.
Right. I mean, was it hard, though, at the same time, relinquishing control of some aspect of your company when you want to be so involved?
It's always hard. I mean, even today, if, let's just say we're working on a new product or a new software feature, giving that away to the product manager and saying, you've got the keys, that's always hard. And you just have to trust that, everyone has the best interest of the business in mind, and everyone wants to put something out to the world that's fantastic. And if you assume that good intent and you've trained them well and they are talented, you got to do it.
Yeah. It's interesting. The other day I was chatting with Jeff Rader, the co-founder of Harry's, and Warby Parker, prolific entrepreneur in the New York tech ecosystem. And I asked him, what would you go back and tell your former self now that you have this knowledge of, what it means to run a company and what some of the challenges are? And he said, honestly, nothing. Like, my naivete was the only thing that got me to start these companies, because otherwise I probably would have turned back knowing how hard it was. And so I'm curious, same question. What would you tell your former self now that you're sort of in the process of building Pilot to become a major company, ISP provider? Like, what do you wish you'd known, if anything?
I like the eyes wide open, hindsight 2020 mentality, which is I don't really feel upset about any mistake or misstep we've made, knowing that I like to learn by doing and learn by making those mistakes. So that's one of my favorite parts of starting the business. I think, the lesson I tell myself every day, and I wonder how successful I would be if I had told myself this in 2014, is just to stay focused and keep it simple. As a founder, you see opportunity, right? You see opportunities to expand, develop new products, hire more people, raise more capital. And when you have something great and you're doing it really well, that's the smell of scale and efficiency.
Sure.
And that's exactly when you should not get distracted and start, thinking about other products or services. And so that manifests itself a little bit different in every business. But in 2014 and even today, if I find myself, in my mind daydreaming about something what I think is great, the answer is probably get back to work. This is not, where you should be focused.
Yeah, keep your ambition in check with the reality of
Absolutely.
running a company. Yeah, that's really interesting. I want to ask you a little bit about the current, what it's like to run your company in this current political climate. In my mind, the past couple of years has been really interesting from a regulatory standpoint, right? There are all of these question marks around, to what extent are tech companies going to become more regulated? We rolled back net neutrality recently, which is, I'm sure, an issue that you have thoughts about. Tell me what the last couple of years have been like from your perspective as the CEO of a company in this space.
Yeah, I think there's, especially for infrastructure, there's two major themes right now. The first is net neutrality, and the second is this concept of connected communities and smart cities. On the net neutrality front, our mission from day one has been to build a network that doesn't have the congestion, right? That doesn't have a need for paid prioritization, that is not dependent on selling the data of our users to advertisers. And charging a fair price for our service gives us the ability to do both, right? Not have to sell data and make sure we have enough bandwidth so that we don't have to sell capacity to our network.
No blocking, no throttling.
And no prioritization. And we've been kind of privileged as a B2B provider to not have some of the stumbling blocks that a residential provider might have. So for us, it's important to reiterate to our customers and to regulators that it is possible to have a really great net neutral business and not really be susceptible to any of these business practices.
Right.
So that's one big theme, and we're watching it closely. We believe in a free and open internet, so we want very, very deeply for net neutrality to be restored. And I would say on the smart cities piece, it's fun dealing with municipalities that are trying to figure out how do we bring more competition to the table, whether that's for small businesses, whether that's for residential subscribers, particularly in underserved communities. And they're all thinking, how do we make the city smart in the process? And every time I've had the opportunity to speak to someone, it's, hey, everything you do, whether it's a light pole or a bench in a park that you want to measure how many people sit on it, it's going to be either wireless or fiber fed. And so you're going to need companies like Pilot laying more cable sooner rather than later. And so that's an interesting trend.
Interesting. So then tell me about what you see as the future of your company. Are you going to be extending your service to hopefully these less connected parts of cities, these less connected parts of the country? Will you be charging individuals for that? What's it going to look like for Pilot?
Yeah, so right now, we're only planning to being a B2B provider. We don't have any plans to do residential today. But our mission really is to help create more competition. And to do that, we have to be in a position to enable new entrepreneurs who want to start internet providers to tackle an opportunity to serve underserved communities, to be a smart city. We have to have network products and services that are able to meet that demand. So over the next years, I imagine, across the nation, we'll be serving plenty of entrepreneurs and cities in that regard.
Yeah. What about the competitive landscape for what you're doing? I mean, it strikes me that you're operating in a space where there are a lot of very large companies with perhaps more name recognition, likely more capital, more resources to put behind what they're doing. How do you, A, differentiate yourself, and B, think about competing effectively when you're on comparatively a shoestring budget?
Yeah, I think there's two different types of competitor. One is, the incumbent who we all know, whether it's in New York or in Boston or Philly, everyone knows your cable company.
Right.
And think of them as the gorilla in the room with tons of capital and infrastructure that they've accumulated over dozens of years. While they have the name recognition, they are notoriously unreliable with poor service, right? So competing against those brands is not especially difficult. But on the B2B side, there are so many competitors who are out there who, as an entrepreneur, you just wouldn't know because there are no brands in the space. And so while there are many people that sell fiber, there are no brands outside of the incumbent. And so that's exciting for Pilot to be able to position ourselves as the first brand in telecom.
Trying to make something unsexy sexy again.
Exactly. Internet is sexy. It's really good.
Internet is sexy. That's a great takeaway. So in the remaining time that we have left, I'm also supposed to plug a conference that Inc. has at the end of the month, also in New Orleans, the end of May through June 1st. It's called GrowCo, Grow Your Business. We're going to have really great speakers, including Damon John, obviously the CEO of Fubu and a Shark Tank investor. So it's going to be really great. And if you include the collision code, you can get 50% off if you go to growco.inc.com. So anybody who's potentially interested in learning more about how to grow your business from a small startup to, maybe potentially one day a massive internet provider, go to growco.inc.com and find out more. Joe, it's been so great to be here with you. Tell me something emotional. Tell me something that keeps you up at night. What are you struggling with? Tell me about your heart. Not sort of this very rational, logical business problems, but tell me about the emotional aspect of what you're struggling with right now.
Yeah, I think, like I said, going from founder to CEO is very difficult. You learn to look at your team, which was, it becomes a family when you start, and you realize that, you grow this large business, and you have to learn to, make decisions very operationally, and that's very emotionally painful sometimes, to do something that's in the best interest of the business and maybe not in the best interest of someone who helped you start the business 4 years ago.
Right, who you probably trust and rely on.
100%. And so it's always important to keep your emotions in check, your empathy in check when you're making those decisions, because it just gets harder and harder.
Yeah. Well, you seem like an empathic guy, and thank you so much for being here with me.
Thank you.
Awesome.